So, can I have a little bit of a quibble? Just like a tiny, teeny one. Can we, put out fairly unrealistic hopes and dreams out here? Because I have one. I want Infinity Nikki to update their unimportant NPCs, and it kind of feels like I'm not the only one in this boat. Does anyone else not really like the character design for regular NPCs? I feel like this might be an unpopular opinion, but I felt this way since release. Important NPCs tend to look very unique and similar to Nikki, like Giovanni, McGill, Medell, Ina, the Seer. However, the rest tend to look a bit off to me. They look too starkly different from Nikki with the way their face is shaped. Nikki has a very anime looking face and super smooth skin, but some random NPCs tend to fall into slightly more uncanny mix. Back when the game first released, I heard that such NPCs were made by an entirely different studio, which explains why they're so different. What are your thoughts? Here are the top 3 comments. Especially in Wishfield, it really felt bizarre to me just how different every other NPC looked compared to Nikki. There were nobody else her age, and if there was, they looked like a completely different style. It actually made me feel as though Nikki really was transported into a world she didn't belong to originally, and I thought it was intentional, but still felt very odd to me. The Perxolians aren't as bad just because they're a different race as a whole, so you can just chalk it up to that. Another one of the things I dislike about Infinity Nikki is despite them being a stylist guilds and other stylists, you're the only one dressing up. I liked the Sovereigns though, because they actually got to see their style you're competing with, and it really felt like a styling contest. The other challengers just told you what theme to dress, and you had to meet their expectations. Did they dress up? No. Did they ever match the theme they give? No. I go back and forth between liking them and hating them. Main NPCs are crafted by the dev team, and it's been suspected that the rest are made by a different studio, given how distinctive and different they look. On one hand, I like that they look like real people. On the other one, the way they stand out from Nikki and the other major NPCs can be jarring. My main issue is everyone looks the same, even from different nations. The Wishfield locals look identical to the Terra people we're seeing, who look identical to the magical dragon people, who look almost identical to the Ling Lang people. The men are worse than the women, in my opinion. It feels like all men in Mirrorland have the same 2 faces. I think if they really just varied the face meshes a little and used a couple more eye and nose shapes, it wouldn't be so bad. I feel like you just have to look at the chins of human NPCs. Pointy? Probably important. Non-pointy or broad? Probably unimportant. I feel like the best illustration for this would be Titans, the ones that we see in cutscene for 3 seconds. They were probably seen as unimportant enough for Info to just kinda outsource their designs to a different company, but I don't know about you, but I streamed the story, and a lot of people in my chat were just like, "Aw, really? That's how they looked. That's it? They just look like big humans." It was like such a disappointment to see them look like big humans, but what's so bad with big humans? Unless, of course, our human faces and our human models are just not really attractive when it comes to this game. And I don't mean in the pretty sense, I mean that there is something really wrong with this appearance, and I just can't put my finger on it. It's like a faux anime style, but it's a lot more doughy than Nikki or main NPCs. To give an example, compare these faces to something like, for example, McGill. Do you do you see how his face differs despite the fact that he's like an NPC? Or compare the woman's face to Medell, and I don't only mean the accessories. I mean, her whole faceplate is just completely different than this faceplate, and it's a far more attractive faceplate. It feels like their expressions have meaning, like some thought went into their design, and they feel a lot more fit for the world that they're in outside of what a regular NPC looks like. So, this is kind of a tough one because obviously background NPCs are so background that you want to save resources on them. You don't want them to look special or to waste too many polygons on them because they're only meant to be in the background. The only reason why these stand out is because they're not the background NPCs. They're kind of the forward NPCs, forward facing NPCs. They have like a whole cutscene to themselves. But because their place in the story is like whole 3 seconds, they weren't given unique or impressive models. Hence the really profound disappointment from me and other people that have looked at them. I know that this is a far-fetching desire, but in the end, we are playing a dress-up game where aesthetics are incredibly important. I understand if Info doesn't want to update old content and like NPCs in Wishfield and NPCs in Itzaland, but I feel like going forward, what they should do is provide maybe 3 or 4 faceplates per gender to the company that's making these side NPCs so that instead of seeing dough, we can see something that's closer to these in face shape and in expression, so that even though you wouldn't be putting that much detail on a regular NPC, you probably wouldn't be putting makeup on them, you wouldn't be giving them special clothes that's reserved for special NPCs. At the very least, they could look less out of place in the open world or when you need to interact with them in cutscene, because this kind of happens often enough where we have to interact with just people in the world, and it's kind of jarring when we do and when we don't need to interact with special NPCs because they just look really doughy. Doughy is like the only way that I can describe this look. Another idea, hopefully not too far-fetched, would be it would be great if Info did those 3 to 4 face templates per gender per region, so that when we meet what's supposed to be a different race, Bergsolians are supposed to be a different race from Wishfield's humans, Titans are supposed to be a different race, we don't just see the exact same doughy faceplate, as that's the point that's like very immersion breaking for me. So I'm gonna include this in my survey. I don't know how successful that's gonna be because I don't know how much resources they wanna invest into background NPCs. Probably not a lot. This is probably a lot more work than they would want to do that, but I think that it would improve my immersion if the facial templates for just your average Joe that's in the world were a bit better than these dough faces that we're getting. However, I don't know if that's just me. So I would like to hear your opinions on this. Do the NPCs in the open world kind of distract you from the jarringness of their art style really differing from key NPCs? or whether you just don't pay attention. I feel like if we didn't have to interact with them for side quests, or they didn't have like a full-on cutscene to themselves, I wouldn't really be noticing it as much because I wouldn't be using them as photo props. I would be using key NPCs as photo props. But we do, so I am noticing it. And when I'm noticing it, it's just I wish that this part was better. That's all I'm saying. So thank you for listening to this quibble of mine. I'm gonna try and return with more in-depth topics that are very less one pet peeve focused. But I also feel like it's the right time to talk about it because, I mean, we're probably having so many different regions remaining. So if we're gonna, be glowing up the regular faceplates for your average NPC, the time to do it would probably be now rather than like 4 or 5 years later. So, yeah, what are your opinions on regular NPCs? Please tell me in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you agree with me, make sure to include it in your survey. I feel like if a lot more of us get surveyed about the exact same thing, there's a higher chance that that thing will be taken seriously and implemented. For now, thank you so much for my Patreon supporters, and toodaloo for now.